Two nuclear-armed underwater vehicles are moving toward the American East Coast right now. Not in a war game, not in a classified briefing that will leak in 6 months, right now. And the people who are supposed to be informing you, the anchors, the analysts, the defense correspondents with their carefully worded chirons, are not telling you what this weapon actually does. They are calling it a large nuclear torpedo and moving on. That description is accurate, the same way calling a house fire a warm room is accurate, technically true, catastrophically insufficient. Tonight we are going to fix that. This is about the Poseidon, Russia's nuclear tsunami weapon, and what its deployment toward the American coast in 2026 means for every single person living within 100 miles of the Atlantic shoreline. If you have never heard of the Poseidon, that is not an accident. If you have heard of it and dismissed it as science fiction or Russian propaganda, I need you to stay with me for the next 25 minutes, because the physics do not care what you believe, and the weapon does not wait for you to catch up. Subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, and share this with everyone you know on the East Coast, because what I am about to walk you through is the most important thing you will hear today, and possibly this year. Let me start with something that the mainstream defense media consistently refuses to do, which is explain why the Poseidon is categorically different from every other nuclear weapon ever built, every nuclear delivery system in existence before the Poseidon, every ballistic missile, every cruise missile, every gravity bomb, every depth charge was designed around the same fundamental principle. You deliver the explosive energy to a point, the destruction radiates outward from that point. The closer you are to the detonation, the more damage you sustain. The farther you are, the less distance is your protection. That is how nuclear weapons work. That is how nuclear deterrence was built. That is the framework inside which every arms control treaty, every escalation management doctrine, every civilian defense protocol has operated for 80 years. The Poseidon throws that framework in the ocean literally because it does not deliver its energy to a point. It delivers its energy to the ocean itself, and then it uses the ocean as the weapon. Think about what that means. The detonation is not the destruction. The detonation is the trigger, the ocean is the gun, and the American East Coast is the target that the gun has been aimed at since the day this weapon's design specifications were finalized in a Russian engineering facility sometime in the early 2010s. This was not improvised. This was not an opportunistic deployment. The Poseidon was designed for this coastline, for these cities, for this specific geometry of continental shelf and population density. Every engineering decision in the weapon reflects a single destructive philosophy. Use water to carry nuclear energy across hundreds of kilometers and concentrate it at the shore. That is what the Poseidon does. And the engineering decisions that make it work are worth understanding in detail, because understanding them is the only way to understand why everything you have been told about stopping it is wrong. The weapon is approximately 20 meters long and 2 meters in diameter. That is significantly larger than any conventional torpedo, and the reason for the size is the warhead, a 2-megaton nuclear device whose physical dimensions require a delivery vehicle of this scale. The propulsion system is nuclear. A compact reactor provides sustained power output for intercontinental range autonomous operation without any surface support, without any communication with its host submarine after release, without any guidance signal that American signals intelligence could detect or disrupt. Nuclear propulsion eliminates every range limitation that battery or fuel-powered systems face. This vehicle can travel 3,000 kilometers from a North Atlantic release point to American coastal detonation geometry at 6270 knots while maintaining its operational depth. That operational depth assessed at 1,000 meters is the most important number in this entire discussion, and I am going to come back to it repeatedly because it is the number that makes every American anti-submarine warfare system irrelevant. 1,000 meters. The deepest American AS engagement capability in the North Atlantic operational area reaches approximately 600 meters. The Poseidon operates 400 meters below the maximum depth of the weapons designed to stop it. That is not a gap in American capability. That is the design specification of the weapon itself. Now I want to walk through the physics of what this weapon actually produces when it detonates, because the word tsunami has been used so many times in so many disaster movies that it has lost its capacity to terrify people appropriately. When the mainstream coverage says nuclear tsunami, most people picture the 2004 Indian Ocean event, terrible, catastrophic, historic, 227,000 people dead across 14 countries, the most destructive natural disaster in modern recorded history, and the implicit assumption is that a nuclear-generated tsunami would be something like that, maybe a little worse, maybe comparable. That assumption is wrong in the specific direction that gets people killed, which is the direction of underestimation. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami was generated by a magnitude 9.1 earthquake that released energy equivalent to approximately 23,000 Hiroshima bombs. The Poseidon's 2 megaton warhead is equivalent to approximately 133 Hiroshima bombs. If you stop the comparison there, you would conclude that the Poseidon produces a tsunami roughly 170 times weaker than the 2004 event, but that comparison misses the single most important variable, which is concentration. The 2004 earthquake released its energy along a fault line approximately 1,200 kilometers long. It distributed its destructive output across a vast geographic area and dissipated energy in multiple directions simultaneously. The Poseidon releases its energy at a single point, at a specific depth, in water specifically chosen for its acoustic propagation properties, at a standoff distance specifically calculated to maximize the energy delivered. To the continental shelf, concentrated single-point energy release in optimized transmission conditions does not produce a weaker tsunami than a vastly larger distributed earthquake. It produces a higher wave, because the physics of pressure wave amplification on a rising continental shelf respond to concentration, not just to total energy. The peer-reviewed calculation for a 2 megaton detonation at 500 meters depth, 300 kilometers offshore from the American East Coast, has been published in academic literature. The researchers who published it did not expect the weapon to actually exist. Their numbers, at the low end representing favorable wave dissipation conditions, produce a shoreline wave height of between 30 and 50 meters. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami produced maximum wave heights of between 15 and 30 meters in the areas of worst impact. The Poseidon's low-end calculation exceeds the maximum height of the deadliest natural tsunami in modern history. At the high end, in locations where continental shelf geometry concentrates wave energy most effectively, the calculation reaches between 100 and 500 meters. The Empire State Building is 443 meters tall. A 500-meter wave does not crash against the Empire State Building. It submerges it, and those high-concentration locations, the places where the continental shelf geometry most efficiently amplifies the pressure wave into catastrophic surface wave height, include the approaches to New York Harbor, the approaches to Boston Harbor, the approaches to the Chesapeake Bay, and the body of water whose shores contain Baltimore, Annapolis, and the Norfolk Naval Complex. The wave does not arrive as a wall of water you can see coming and run from. It arrives as a sustained inundation water moving inland at 100 kilometers per hour, covering every elevation below its maximum height for the entire duration of its inland penetration for a 100-meter wave against the relatively flat coastal terrain of the eastern seaboard. The inland penetration is measured in kilometers, not city blocks. The warning time between detonation detection and wave arrival at the shoreline detonation 300 kilometers offshore, wave propagating at approximately 700 kilometers per hour, is approximately 25 minutes. 25 minutes for tens of millions of people to reach elevation above 100 meters. 25 minutes. That is the entire window between detection and inundation for the most densely populated coastline in the Western Hemisphere. This is the point in the analysis where someone always says, well, America will detect it and destroy it before it reaches detonation geometry. I understand why people want that to be true. I need you to understand system by system why it is not. American anti-submarine warfare capability is genuinely the most sophisticated in the world. The SOSUS hydrophone network, the P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, the Virginia-class attack submarines, these represent decades of investment, genuine technical excellence, and the accumulated institutional knowledge of every submarine confrontation since the Cold War. None of it can stop the Poseidon that has been released tonight, not because American defense is incompetent, because the Poseidon was specifically engineered to operate outside the performance envelope of every system in that architecture. Start with SOSUS, the sound surveillance system, the fixed hydrophone network on the ocean floor that detects submarines through their acoustic signatures. SOSUS was designed and calibrated to detect Soviet ballistic missile submarines, large, complex, machinery-heavy vehicles with characterizable acoustic signatures. The Poseidon is not a submarine. It is a torpedo, a much smaller vehicle whose machinery signature is significantly below the acoustic threshold SOSUS was calibrated to detect. Its nuclear propulsion operates through a closed thermodynamic cycle that produces significantly less acoustic output than the conventional propulsion systems against which SOSUS detection thresholds were set. The combination of smaller vehicle size and nuclear propulsion acoustic characteristics produces a signature that falls below SOSUS detection threshold at the ranges that would make network-wide tracking possible. The network was built for a threat the Poseidon does not resemble. The P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, and yes, America named its premier aircraft after the weapon designed to defeat it, which is either ironic or appropriate depending on your disposition, deploys sonobuous, expendable acoustic sensors dropped into the water to provide localized detection. Sonobuoy sensor depth is limited by cable length and pressure tolerance to approximately 600 meters under operational conditions. The Poseidon operates at 1,000 meters, 400 meters below the maximum sensor depth. The P-8 cannot detect a vehicle operating below its sensor range regardless of acoustic signature. This is not a sensor gap that better technology can close in the near term. This is a physics constraint imposed by the operating depth of the target. The Virginia-class attack submarine, the best hunter-killer platform on Earth against conventional submarine targets, has an assessed operating depth of 600 to 800 meters. The Poseidon operates at 1,000 meters, deeper than the Virginia-class can effectively maneuver and employ its weapons. American attack submarines cannot pursue or engage a target operating outside their performance envelope, and the Mk-48 ADCAP torpedo, the primary anti-submarine weapon carried by those Virginia-class boats, has a maximum operating depth assessed at approximately 800 meters. The Poseidon operates 200 meters below the weapon designed to kill it. The picture is not ambiguous. Every American asset was designed against threats operating within a depth envelope that the Poseidon specifically exceeds. The depth capability is not incidental to the weapon's design. It is the primary operational feature. The Poseidon was designed to be below American ASU's reach before AS was even deployed to stop it. This is not a failure of American defense. This is a success of Russian engineering, the deliberate, systematic exploitation of every constraint in the American anti-submarine warfare architecture, turned into a weapon profile that fits precisely into the gap between what American systems can reach and what the ocean allows. If this analysis is hitting you the way it should, this is the moment to share it. Post this right now. Send it to your family on the East Coast. Send it to anyone who needs to understand why the Poseidon deployment is not just another nuclear alert. The people in power are not having this conversation publicly. We are going to have it anyway. Now let us talk about Vladimir Putin's strategic calculation, because the mainstream coverage is going to frame the Poseidon deployment as irrational, as the act of a desperate or unhinged leader making threats he cannot operationalize. That framing is comfortable. It is also analytically wrong, and wrong in the direction that produces catastrophic policy miscalculation. The Poseidon deployment is not irrational. It is the product of a strategic logic that is internally coherent, carefully constructed, and whose coherence makes it more dangerous, not less, than an irrational act would be. The deployment serves three simultaneous strategic functions, and understanding all three is the only way to understand what Putin is actually doing tonight. The first function is absolute escalation dominance. Nuclear deterrence theory, the entire architecture of mutual assured destruction that has governed superpower relations since 1949 rests on symmetry. Both sides possess sufficient nuclear capability to survive a first strike and retaliate with unacceptable damage. The deterrence works because the consequences of nuclear war are symmetrically catastrophic. Nobody wins. The Poseidon breaks that symmetry. A nuclear-generated tsunami inundating the American East Coast produces casualties and infrastructure destruction on a scale that exceeds the combined destructive output of the entire American nuclear arsenal employed against Russian cities. Not because the Poseidon's yield is larger, the American arsenal's combined yield is vastly larger than 2 Poseidon warheads, but because the destructive mechanism, coastal inundation across thousands of kilometers of densely populated shoreline, is more efficient at producing casualties per yield unit than any other nuclear employment option in existence. 2 weapons producing more American casualties than America can produce Russian casualties with thousands of weapons. That is not parity. That is absolute escalation dominance, and a deterrence framework built on mutually assured destruction provides no answer to a weapon that manufactures that kind of asymmetry. The second function is deployment as communication. The Poseidon has not detonated. It is moving, slowly, autonomously, at 1,000 meters depth toward the American coast. Putin has not announced a detonation timeline. He has not issued an ultimatum with a deadline. He has released the weapon, allowed American intelligence to detect the release, and let the knowledge of what is moving toward the shoreline do the strategic work. The message does not require explicit articulation. Washington is calculating the consequences of the weapon reaching detonation geometry. Washington is calculating the policy adjustments that avoiding those consequences requires. And the Poseidon's slow transit speed days rather than hours from North Atlantic release to East Coast detonation range is a deliberate feature of the communication strategy, not a limitation of the weapon. Days during which Washington knows it is coming, days during which domestic political pressure from tens of millions of coastal residents compounds every strategic calculation, days during which the gap between what the national security establishment wants to decide in controlled conditions and what the public panic of a known approaching nuclear tsunami weapon demands becomes politically unmanageable. The weapon is not just moving through the ocean, it is moving through the American political system, and it was designed to do both simultaneously. The third function is deterrence extension, raising the cost of American military action against Russia to a level that has no precedent in the history of nuclear deterrence, not the cost of nuclear exchange, the cost of coastal civilization, every previous Russian escalatory move, doctrine activation, weapons transfers, strategic asset repositioning was designed to raise costs within a framework that American strategic planners had modeled and prepared for. The Poseidon operates outside every model American strategic planners have prepared. The specific policy outcomes the deployment is designed to compel are not obscure. American military disengagement from ongoing regional conflicts where Russian interests are at stake, American restraint on enforcement mechanisms that constrain Russian strategic options, American acceptance of a security architecture in which Russian influence operates without American military pushback. The Poseidon is not deployed because Russia wants to generate a tsunami. It is deployed because Russia wants to generate a conversation whose terms favor the side with a nuclear tsunami weapon in transit,